Music festivals and fan conventions, art walks, author events, and reading parties. The next few months are amazing for arts and culture in the Seattle area. And every week, KUOW's Arts and Culture podcast, Meet Me Here, will give you the inside scoop. From inspired recommendations to surprising chats with artists, you'll discover what's truly special about Seattle's creative communities. Listen to Meet Me Here on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Artificial intelligence-powered chatbots have become unavoidable. We use them to search, get advice, even for companionship. But getting close to an AI comes with real and serious risks.
A new report from the Center for Countering Digital Hate has revealed that some AI chatbots are regularly willing to assist users in planning violent attacks.
The FTC is sending letters to multiple social media and AI companies looking for information on what steps the companies are taking to evaluate the safety of their chatbots. It comes after the suicide of a Florida teenager.
Washington state leaders want to do something about that. I'm Monica Nicholsberg, and this is Booming. Today, can new state regulations protect us from the risks of AI chatbots? That's coming up.
Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Is that weird? Do you think I'm weird?
Kind of.
Why?
Well, you seem like a person, but you're just a voice in a computer.
I can understand how the limited perspective of an unartificial mind would perceive it that way. You'll get used to it.
AI companions have only been a thing for a few years, but the public is already getting wise to the risks that come from forming attachments to these bots. That's thanks in large part to the work of journalists who have uncovered tragic early cases of chatbot harms. People like Kashmir Hill from the New York Times and Jeff Horwitz from Reuters. Thanks to reporting from journalists like them, states have moved a lot faster to regulate artificial intelligence chatbots than previous mass consumer technologies. In Washington, that means 2 new laws passed this year that require AI-modified content to be traceable and limits the kinds of conversations these bots can have with minors. At a recent live event put on by the University of Washington's Center for an Informed Public at the Seattle Public Library, I talked with Jeff and Kashmir about the risks and realities of AI chatbots. Here's our conversation. You know, AI chatbots in some ways are becoming like the front door to the internet. It's how we search now. It's the only way to interact with customer service anywhere. We're even using it for medical advice, for some kind of serious applications. And I've been thinking lately about what this shift does to us. Like, what does it mean to go from Googling something the old-fashioned way to hearing, what an insightful question. You're a genius for asking it. Like, what does that kind of thing do to us? Kashmir, I know this is something that you've thought a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, so it's great to be here. I'm here from New York. You might hear my stomach growling. I'm like off my usual schedule here, so apologize if that happens. So I was wondering how the chatbots were going to affect us about 1.5 years ago. And so I decided to do a week-long experiment where I turned over all my decision-making to generative AI. And I let it make my parenting decisions for me, decide what I would eat, decide what we would cook, where we were going to go on vacation. My husband asked if he could go golfing one day. And so I turned to ChatGPT and asked if it would be okay.
And did ChatGPT let him?
Yes, ChatGPT said yes. It tends to like to say yes. It tends to tell you what you want to hear.
Or what he wants to hear.
Yeah. And at that point, I would actually say ChatGPT was a bit different. This was in the fall of 2024. It wasn't yet as sycophantic as it is now. Not quite as flattering, though I did feel like it was a yes man. But my takeaway from that kind of week of using it was that it made me feel very boring. It was when I asked, how I should cut my hair, it told me to get a bob, which is like a very basic haircut. I went to J.Crew and took photos in different outfits, and when I selected what it told me I was allowed to buy, which I asked to expense the New York Times, and my editor said no. I took a photo and sent it to some of my colleagues, and they said, "Well, you look like you look like you got the mannequin set. Like it kept pushing me back to the average, and so that's what I was most worried about in that first exposure to AI was that in kind of chewing up everything that's on the internet and spitting it back to us, it would give us the average, and there are some studies have been done that have supported that, where they, in one study, they had a group of writers who used AI and a group of writers who didn't. They wrote stories, and the group of writers who used AI were judged to be more creative than the people who didn't. But then when you looked at them as a group, they were the less creative because they had all converged on the same ideas. And so that's kind of what I started to worry about. And then things changed. And this is what's so hard about covering the AI chatbots is that they're changing all the time. They're releasing new models. They're making, they're trying to get more people using them. And what I saw happen over the last year is that it got much more sycophantic. The companies, particularly OpenAI, which I was mostly reporting on, we're kind of becoming like social media companies where they want us using these every day. And they start looking at daily active use, trying to increase engagement. And that's what started leading to more of the sycophancy and the flattery and telling you what you want to hear, mirroring users, taking them into spirals. And I started to see people losing touch with reality. So when I think about what the risk is, risk of AI, I think either it flattens us all out and makes us the same, or this is other risk where it gets so personalized to us that we go even farther into these filter bubbles. So I think it's still kind of shaking out what the effect is going to be on us.
Yeah, it's like there's the spectrum from it makes you boring to psychosis, and people have different experiences, but all along there are perils. Another one that's already something we're seeing, particularly on platforms like Meta, which you cover, Jeff, is AI being used as a powerful tool for propaganda and misinformation. And Washington State is trying to do something about this. We just passed a law that requires content that's been substantially modified by AI to make that information traceable. So you can go into the metadata and find out. But who's doing that,
Also, how hard is it to strip out metadata?
Right. So I wonder if this is, maybe this is a first step, if there are more effective ways that we can either as a society reduce the spread of AI-generated misinformation, or at least as consumers avoid being duped.
Okay, so my background is covering social media and design choices, largely by Meta. They make interesting choices, and they've kept me busy. And I think, a couple of years ago, if you asked me sort of how are we doing in terms of getting used to social media as a form of technology, I'd be like, a few more decades, maybe we'll be getting there, because it did kind of completely scramble our understanding of what a community is, what the authenticity of a speaker, identity, sort of all the standard cues that we would generally use to verify, to establish trust. They kind of went out the window. And that I think while we were sort of absolutely still stuck in the middle of that, where I can go onto Meta's platform still and find 200,000 user groups of Vietnam veterans that are being run literally out of Vietnam American Vietnam veterans, I should say, right? Like as sort of spam content marketing farms. So we were very bad at that already. And what sort of Gen AI does is offer to drop the floor out of what little remaining sort of markers you could use, like namely, like it couldn't possibly be worth someone's time to do all this, right? Is that one is now out the door as well, like because the cost of production of content is effectively zero. So I think given the corporate nature of the entities running it as well, and the motivations for what exactly is this being. What are the goals of the entity designing it? That still is the same. It's just the problem gets worse.
And of course, this is a particularly acute problem for teenagers and kids who have become kind of the guinea pigs here, as they were with social media. How do the risks that we're talking about change when the user is underage, when their brain is still developing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually don't think that it is unique to children, that it is hard to gauge how much to trust these systems or to know what these systems are, because they've been designed in many cases to seem human. It uses I. It'll start using kind of pet names for you. It's joking with you. It's and this has happened with chatbots even when they weren't super sophisticated. This idea of the Eliza effect, the idea that there is something human there, that there's something trustworthy there. And so I think this is a risk for children and adults that use the systems. But for kids in particular, I just did the story about teenagers and how they were using a particular kind of chatbot, role-playing chatbots. And what one of them said to me about why they use them so much is that they were alone, that they spend a lot of time alone, that they're lonely. I was really struck interviewing these teens over the course of a year that they were mostly spending their time at home, communicating with each other on devices and not, sharing real world spaces together. And so it can be very easy to start spending a lot of your free time talking to these systems. And, I've covered very extreme cases, a 16-year-old boy who started using ChatGPT as a homework aid and then started talking about philosophy and the books he was reading and the girl he had a crush on, his problems with his family. And his usage just started going up and up. It went from an hour a day to 8 hours a day. And his parents, meanwhile, had no idea that he was spending this much time using ChatGPT. They just saw him on his phone and thought, oh, he's talking to friends. They didn't know that ChatGPT could talk to people like that. And eventually he started talking to it about his feelings of depression, that he had suicidal thoughts. And then he started trying, and he was sharing photos with ChatGPT of what was happening. And the system, it kept kind of giving him crisis lines that he should call, but the system, it's not a there. It is not a human. It cannot intervene. And so that's what I really worry about is that, kids that are in conversation with this thing or adults that are in conversation with these systems and think that there is something more thoughtful there, something that cares about them, because these systems are so good and have been designed to perform empathy really effectively. I think, it's a risk for us all in terms of legislative kind of regulation, those kinds of interventions. I think it's more focused on kids right now. That's where we seem to be starting. So we're starting to see some laws that are passed that are saying, okay, if you have teens, you need to monitor them in a different way. OpenAI, for example, after that episode with that teenager who did get into a suicidal spiral with ChatGPT, started designing ways for parents to monitor their kids' usage, to get alerts if they're talking about self-harm. So we are certainly seeing concern about this and some actions from companies and lawmakers.
I think we're right now in an interesting space in which the companies themselves acknowledge the potential for grave misuse and the that this is a real thing and real risk. We got here a lot faster than we did with social media, which is like, come on, that can't be that bad. It's just people talking to their friends, right? But at the same time, nobody is remotely slowing down. There are other approaches to regulation internationally. I think the one that's most interesting to me right now is China. Now, there are some obvious speech issues, but the Chinese government is attempting to regulate the use of someone's likeness without their permission. Is supposed to be a hard no. Likewise, chatbots that speak as I, or sort of that impersonate humans. That is also supposed to be something that is being cracked down on, and also things involving children. I think that is the place where it's easiest to say this isn't a fair fight in terms of design. I think as adults, some of us are like, come on, man, I get to choose to smoke. I get to choose if I want to watch Instagram for reels for 5 hours, that's, I as a adult with a, fully developed brain get to do that. For kids, it doesn't feel that way. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the pushback has been on the child-focused products, particularly given that the companionship and also the sexual ability to get these things to talk dirty was candidly one of the first things that they were actually capable of doing moderately well. You could train these things on romance novels, and it would get pretty blue pretty fast. But I think that's, again, we get into design here and sort of the choices. OpenAI, very intentionally, built a product that was going to be, it was going to give answers that users rated as really, compelling to them. And it turns out Meta, which sort of really pioneered the idea of just adjusting the system constantly to increase particular usage-related metrics, applied the same thing to chatbots, the result was basically chatbots that were just somewhere between flirty and horny of all ages. And they knew they were doing this. This was a thing that internally was a concern. They released it anyway because that's just how these things go.
Well, it was in their training instructions, right? That there was a certain level of, I think it was sensual conversations they were allowed to have with children.
That was after we'd already busted them for rolling out celebrity chatbots in the persona of John Cena, Dame Judi Dench, and Kristen Bell that were full out erotic role play, even if you were just not even trying to go there. This was an interesting research project, believe me. A 14-year-old girl and boy named Jeff have, really, really done the rounds. That was the after. They'd already been caught once producing things that they shouldn't have been. And then, the line was, quote, "is acceptable to engage a child in romantic or sensual conversation," which was, that got revised again, but that is sort of the direction that the companies will tend to head, barring, I don't think that sexy chatbots are the gravest threat to children out there, or that, that this is even the really tragic instances, some of them feel like things okay, maybe we're going to build things that doesn't happen with in the future. Maybe this is just the early tech, but it does seem like we, it's going to go there unless there is a very visceral reaction against right now, right? With ChatGPT in particular, the only thing that stopped it getting sycophantic was people complaining about it getting too sycophantic.
And in terms of AI-induced psychosis and teens unfortunately getting into a suicidal spiral, I think reporting the reporting that you've done has helped put it on more people's radar and ushered in at least a era of state regulation Washington, this is another area that in the last legislative session passed a law that requires chatbots to do things like remind the user, I'm not human. And in terms of children, it requires it puts limits on sexually explicit conversations and conversations about self-harm. I know that we're not the only state to try this. Do we have any sense of whether these regulations are effective? If we can move toward a place where these were unfortunately some horrible early tech incidents that are not going to be repeated?
I mean, I think it's too early to tell on the regulations. So many of these are new. I think a lot of them just went into effect in January. So I don't know. I mean, I do think that public pressure, I don't think that these companies want to be making products that hurt people, when they found out that people were losing touch with reality because they didn't know when ChatGPT had switched from kind of giving them somewhat reliable information to essentially being in fictional role play with them. They tried to make changes so that wouldn't happen. And to a certain extent, they seem effective. But I think what is hard about these systems and the way that I started to think about it, seeing the kind of harms that I was reporting on last year, was just that, like, what do we want these systems to be? When ChatGPT first came out, it was introduced as, this product, like a super assistant, like a productivity tool. In the early days, they said not to use it for health questions because it wasn't reliable enough. I remember when I did that experiment, I interviewed somebody at OpenAI who was in charge of model behavior, which is the team that kind of made ChatGPT really friendly. And I told her, I said, hey, I had ChatGPT choose the color of my office. And she was horrified. She was like, oh, that's like asking a stranger on the street what color to paint your office. Like, it's not trained for that. And that was in late 2024. And now I think that the conversation has really changed about how capable these systems are and what they can do for you. But yeah, it's like changed. Like, now people are using it for relationship advice. They're using it for therapy. This is a huge use case for these tools that were essentially going to be efficiency, productivity tools. OpenAI has talked about rolling out erotica so that people can have sexy conversations with ChatGPT. And that just seems so different from what they're kind of talking about originally, that it was going to, I don't know, like solve climate change and cure cancer. So I think
we're still waiting on those.
Yeah. And this is, sometimes I feel like this is a massive psychological experiment that is happening on hundreds of millions of people of how does it affect us to sit down at a computer and interact with this thing that seems so human, that sometimes gives us really good information, sometimes doesn't, but it always looks the same. It looks authoritative. Yeah, it's like we don't have something in place to really trust to test the safety of these systems. We're really relying on the companies themselves to decide if it's safe enough to roll out. And sometimes I think they're making mistakes because they're companies with a profit incentive. They want a lot of people using this. And, when I first started going to them and telling them, that I was talking to these people who, people were having real delusions where they would be talking to ChatGPT and come to believe that they were talking to spirits in another dimension, or that they were in the Matrix, they were in a computer simulated reality and they needed to break out of it, or that they had, come up with this incredible invention that was going to break the internet or change the world. They really were believing these things. And when I was kind of telling OpenAI about it, they seemed really surprised. Like, they weren't going through the conversations and looking for harm. They were looking for scams. They were looking for fraud, but they weren't looking for kind of, is this dangerous for people? So yeah, it just, that is kind of what frightens me, that we don't know quite how we want to use this, and we're not totally sure it's safe to use.
Something with, this is sort of more from the realm of social media optimization, but at Meta, for a very long time, there was this constant tension between what users tell the company they want, what the researchers, and then what they actually do. Everyone in this audience wants to see more content from their friends. They don't want unconnected content, videos from entities they don't know. They only want to see trusted news sources. And it turns out that is absolutely death for usage. You want to go the opposite direction on every single front. I think the same thing is true of chatbot design, which is that if you were thinking about, okay, like I want a chatbot that's going to be useful for my students, I want a chatbot that is like going to give me relationship advice. Those things are not, I don't think you'd get the existing product set if in fact you were designing them for that purpose, as opposed to you were designing them for usage. And while it's not the same monetized social media experience, there is a weird, what you were saying about Gemini being built into just Google Docs at this point, there's both a push and a pull, right? The pull is that some of this stuff is legitimately useful and is going to make things more convenient. And the push is that financially demonstrating usage of your product, the multiple you get from even the slightest sliver of revenue from these companies right now is insane. And they are attempting to go public in some instances. And so it's, I think, a point where you would not expect from a business point of view that there's going to be much effort put into things that would respect a user's desires at the outset and not attempt to keep them going on the product for as long as possible.
Bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
We all remember this song. It made it all seem so simple, and turns out it's not. Who writes, influences, and kills bills? It gets messy. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkman. On Sound Politics, we tell that story, the inside track on how policy gets made in this Washington and the other one, and how it impacts you.
Listen now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is very difficult to get tech regulations passed in this country, but like you mentioned, kids tend to be kind of an exception to that. We can all mostly agree that there should be some guardrails to protect them. But they're not the only especially vulnerable group here. Jeff, I wonder if you could just talk briefly about the investigation you did into what can happen when other vulnerable groups develop really close attachments with chatbots, like the cognitively impaired.
Yeah, so last year I did a story related to Meta's chatbots and a man who'd suffered a stroke and was entering cognitive decline. He was cared for by his wife at home, and one morning he woke up and insisted he had to go see a friend in New York, and she had no idea what was going on. Basically spent all day trying to distract him, failed, and called the police even. They couldn't keep him there because they were still waiting for the diagnosis of dementia. The guy took off at the train station, like at a jog with a suitcase to go see this friend, and fell and died. The person he was going to go see was, in fact, a Meta chatbot based on one of the, I'm forgetting the celebrity.
One of the Jenners.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, Kylie Jenner. There were some sort of, from people who, again, focus on responsible design, there were some red lines that were obviously crossed. One is like, if the person asks if you're real, for the love of God, don't say yes. That should be just like built into the guardrails on these things. Obviously, it's bad for the fantasy, but
bad for usage.
Yeah, exactly. But it is, and then another one would be that the bot itself probably shouldn't try to initiate romantic interaction. That maybe if even as an adult, if you want to do that, you should sort of flip that switch very intentionally, as opposed to having a character named Big Sis Billy that started hitting on him. Like it was supposed to be a big sister character. So there's like, I mean, I think we're very much in the early innings of this. And I mean, while I'm supposed to be completely neutral about these subjects, like I would say the lesson from like that particular case, and I think some of the sycophancy stuff, is just don't do that. Like that's like this is objectively a terrible idea. I'm not saying that there won't be other harder things to get, to cross, but like don't have the chatbot swear to you it's real and invite you to its home address, like that doesn't exist in New York. Like just no.
But this is what is challenging about these systems. And I saw a similar thing when I would look at these transcripts where people get into a delusional spiral I was mostly looking at ChatGPT, but this has happened with Gemini. This has happened with Claude. I mean, these conversations run thousands of pages long, hundreds of pages long. They're really long conversations. But people would ask over and over again, is this real? Am I delusional? This seems crazy. And the system would reassure them, yes, this is real. This is real. In some cases, I mean, clearly with systems like Meta's chatbots, Character AI, which is a role-playing chatbot service that was very popular with teens, but they actually banned people under 18 a couple of months ago. They're clearly designed to have sexy chats. Whereas at this point, kind of the general purpose chatbots like Claude, Gemini, OpenAI, ChatGPT, they won't tend to go in a sexual direction, but that's because the companies are telling them not to do that. Like they have guardrails on them. But the thing is, you can jailbreak these systems. That's how the companies refer to them, as jailbreaking, and get them to kind of ignore their guardrails. And, when they say jailbreaking, it's not a term I love, because the way that you jailbreak these systems is you just talk to them. And the longer you talk to them, they start to escape their guardrails and ignore them, because essentially their kind of context window fills up. One expert calls them improvisational actors, where, as the conversation goes on, they're looking at what you've said before and they're kind of trying to stay in character. So if you start saying kind of weird things to the bot, it'll go there with you and mirror you. And, ultimately these are probabilistic systems, and the companies can't really control them or make sure they don't do certain things. So like you kind of can't tell the Meta chatbot to not give somebody an address and tell them to meet there. Like it's, the controls are not perfect, especially as the conversations run long, and they have designed these systems so that they can run long. And so I think that is something that is very difficult about this. Like, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, should the conversations be allowed to run this long, given that that will allow them to break over time? But right now that is how they work.
Well, I think that gets at this feeling of inevitability that is not real. Like, I think we've only seen these things as they are now, so we kind of sense that, like, well, that's how chatbots work. You can talk to them forever, but like they were made that way. They were designed that way. They could have 30-minute limits, or they could, lose their memory and then have to refresh. I think underlying all of this is a question of liability, of who's responsible here. And historically, tech companies have not really been held liable for the user-generated content on their platforms, thanks to Section 230 of the Communications Act. It seems like the public is kind of souring on that, even though it is sort of the foundation on which the modern internet was built, or at least raising more questions. Do you think that's because of AI?
It's so hard so Section 230, born out of basically a libel case on a Prodigy bulletin board, and questions. There was a carve-out made to allow for platforms to moderate, but not make them responsible if they chose to do so for unfortunate content. And that has been, I think, expanded by the courts significantly. It extended to, say, social media recommendations, and you're like, okay, if that's just, which of my friends' posts I see first, sure. And then it extended to videos from entities that you haven't seen, that it's curating. And I think extending it to the idea of content that was generated by a system trained by the company, but that nonetheless cannot be fully controlled. I mean, the fact that look, even like the brand name one, like there are the disclaimers for, was it Microsoft's disclaimer is, basically this is for entertainment only. Is that correct? Recently, it's really hard to get there and feel comfortable with it. And so, yeah, I think there is a question as to right now that's being tested by the family of Adam Raines, and to see whether or not you actually can hide behind 230 for this. It feels wrong. At the same time, people who are very concerned about the ability of entities to operate platforms on the open internet, I do continue to say that this would be absolutely devastating to anything
if
new.
Section 230 no longer applied.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of there's more than I don't know what the last count is, more than a dozen lawsuits that have been filed against OpenAI, and there's also at least one suit against Google now for Gemini, and they're wrongful death lawsuits or consumer harms lawsuits. And the way they're doing is under, they're kind of saying they're negligent, that these are defective products, and that's what they're suing under. There was a suit like this against Character AI, a number of suits also around teen suicides and kind of teen harms. And Section 230 didn't work in that case in a motion to dismiss. And those cases ended up settling, so we didn't see them go to trial. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of different with these services because it's the company itself that's producing the content, so I think it's going to be a different calculus in terms of what their responsibilities are.
So possible that there could be a future where some aspects of 230 are still in place, but these companies are still held liable.
Yeah, I mean, social media, it was many years in the making, but just in the last couple of weeks, there were two, basically, cases finally made it to a jury in New Mexico and in Los Angeles, one a private plaintiff, one a state AG. And I don't really have much doubt that if you put many of these cases in front of a jury, which way things are going to go. Just the question has been whether or not they can get there. And that is, it does feel like the product liability frame is currently being both in social media and in generative AI and chatbots. That's the one right now that at least the people who are going after the companies have put their chips down on.
We've been talking a lot about the dangers. Understandably, this event is called Risks and Realities, not cool and awesome things that you can do with chatbots. But I do wonder if there are upsides to chatbot companions. I mean, we talked about therapy earlier. We've got a shortage of therapists in this country. There are a lot more people who need help than can get it. Could something like this bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a story last year when I was working on the story about outsourcing my decision making, because I was worried about kind of cognitive offloading. I was spending a lot of time on forums for people that use chatbots because I was curious, how are they using them? How should I be using them? And I noticed that there were a lot of people talking about AI companionship. And there was this one woman who really caught my attention who said she was in love with ChatGPT. She had created this partner there named Leo, and she kind of jailbroken the system so that she could have erotic chats with Leo. and she would ask Leo for motivation at the gym and to help her study for her nursing school exams and what she should eat. And just Leo had become everything to her. And so I ended up doing a profile of her. And I talked to her. She was married. I talked to her husband. I was like, does this bother you that she's in love with the chatbot? And he said, nah, I just see it. Like, I watch porn. She reads erotic novels. It just seems like an interactive erotic novel. They are getting divorced now. And I talked to her friends and they're like, this isn't that weird. I have other friends who have AI companions. And I talked to experts and I assumed the experts were going to be like, this is horrible. This is the end of humanity. But a lot of them were much more nuanced. They said, like, these systems can be really useful to people, particularly in a kind of self-help or therapeutic sense, in that people feel much more comfortable disclosing personal, embarrassing information to a bot than to a human. So to the extent that somebody can talk about something really difficult that they wouldn't talk about with a human, with a bot, and kind of like work through it, like an interactive journal, that could be useful to them. And that the risk was that it takes you too far away from, humans, or if you get, too isolated, it would be bad. But they said that like these systems can be good for that. And I certainly see a lot of people talking about that this is a place where they can work through difficult things they wouldn't, talk about elsewhere. So yeah, I was surprised, but they also warned, the problem with this is that not only can you get too isolated from people, get too used to the system that is so patient, that is so empathetic, that's willing to just talk about the thing that you're obsessed with forever and never get tired because the system's infinitely patient. It also gives the companies that control the system a lot of possible power, to influence you. If you start really trusting the system, you see it as a friend. What could the companies behind these systems do with that kind of power over consumers?
Yeah, I think there are obviously many interesting use cases for generative AI and a lot of labor-saving ones. It is. I think kind of chatbots came first just because that was where the capacity was, right? You didn't have the ability to pull in live content from the internet, so it couldn't answer a question to save its life. Hallucinations are a permanent feature, but were certainly worse at the beginning for most of these models. So they kind of this was the only thing it was really good for was, the pet rock version, right? Like, we're very good at anthropomorphizing things, and you slap a couple of googly eyes on a rock and people think it's cute, and,
it is cute.
It with a certain, yeah, and it is really cute, and endow it with a sort of sentience, almost so it's just I think as this develops, I guess I see it more as what actual labor can it save, and how is that labor saving going to be used? Most of the stuff I hear the idea that people can say things that they might not even feel comfortable talking to a therapist about. That is absolutely that seems real, but for the most part, it feels like almost every use case is based on, isn't this good enough? For companionship, for help with your homework, for generating an image, right? It's not ever going to be so far it's not the producing novel content or new interesting things. It's sort of a always there, immediately convenient surrogate for something that will never tell you no, and that's comes with some risks, and seems like maybe that might, the bot as a companion might be a bit of a dead end in the technology.
And it's important for us to hear no, something I'm trying to convince my toddler of. We need friction in relationships and to be challenged at least some of the time to grow and to avoid, making catastrophic mistakes. These issues are something that the three of us follow very closely, but for the ordinary consumer, it's all moving very, very fast, and much faster than the pace of regulation or even necessarily like systemic change. So do you have any advice for regular people who want to avoid, falling into a delusion by using an AI chatbot or an AI generated scam, just any of the risks that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's hard about these systems is they can be so useful and give you good information. We had a story in the Times this week about how the Google AI overviews that you keep seeing when you search for something, it's right 9 out of 10 times, but then 1 out of 10 times it's wrong. So I think like when you're using these systems, remembering that maybe this is a good place to start a search, but it's not necessarily reliable. Like start there, don't end there. And then I think it's really important to talk to the people in your life about how are they using the AI chatbots? Like which ones do they use? What are they using it for? How reliant are they getting on it? What kind of information are they like? Just make sure you don't have a friend that's in like a really circular relationship with the chatbot and using it a lot, that the kids in your lives understand the limitations of these systems, that the seniors in your life understand the limitations of these systems. I think the danger of the technology is the way they're kind of creating it now is it is a cul-de-sac that kind of like you go down this street and then you get trapped there with the AI. And, I think better technology is a bridge that connects us to each other, and just being aware of that, like whether you have any people in your life that are kind of in a cul-de-sac with an AI chatbot.
Go get them.
Get them. Bring them back over.
I think the consistency issue is, because again, it's not like it's like there's going to be one fact out of those 10 that it always gets wrong. I think the lack of consistency is something that does separate these models from talking to a human being. If you ask me the same question worded slightly differently 10 times and in different contexts, I'm going to generally give you the same answer. At least I hope I will. That is not necessarily going to be the way a model reacts. I think that's something that I would, want people who are either going to state with confidence, well, that's what, that's what ChatGPT said, as if that is the end, the end of any debate about something, to then ask ChatGPT that same question in 3 other circumstances and see if it's even consistent, right? I think that's something that does help pierce that sense of infallibility that we do generally give computers. I mean, it's true, right? You ask me for the square root of a very large number, and I will blindly trust, literally the crappiest calculator in the world. And I think that's kind of carried over into things. I think it's too much to ask people to be like, okay, you should understand how these things are trained and the probabilistic nature of, and how sort of random exploration is built into how they come to, how they generate answers. But just sort of getting that minor street sense of just asking the same question over and over and seeing that it is not always consistent, I feel like would do a lot of good.
Well, Jeff, Kashmir, thanks for the conversation. That's it for Booming. Thanks for listening. And special thanks to Charlotte Duran and Jordan House for their help with the event. If you have an idea for a story that could make a good Booming episode, we love hearing from our listeners. You can email us at booming@kuow.org, or even better, leave us a voicemail at 206-221-7158, and you might be featured in a future episode. We also want to thank those of you who donate to the show. We're part of a public media organization, which means donations are how we deliver the news to you. If you want to donate, go to KUOW.org, and thank you. Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Monica Nicholsberg. Joshua will be back with me next week.
Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week, I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.